Good evening, everybody. This is Mr. Patriarch, joined by the Prudentialist. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Me too. I'm looking at the chat and it says DC perspective. Boy, am I sleepy today. I hear you, DC perspective. Before this, before this class, class. I keep saying class. Before. Guess what I do for a living. Before this stream, I had one hell of a weekend with my family, and we had a wonderful time at my wife's cousin's house, and we had lots of dop, which is slang for drinking in South Africa, and then we came back home, and I just had a nap literally before this stream because I was too juiced out. So take a nap before the stream if you need, guys, because it's going to be heavy, but hopefully not too heavy. So before we begin, real quick, if you are new to this stream, please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet already. Here at Mr. Patriarch, we enjoy talking about all kinds of things, high IQ things, and hopefully entertaining and enlightening things, but I don't want to break my arm patting myself on the back. Prudentialist also makes some excellent content, and I believe he has just made a stream. You should definitely go subscribe to him, Prudentialist. You want to hit the people with what your most recent stream was about.
Sure. So our most recent stream was the Sunday stream, and we were talking about the ongoing tensions in Russia and Ukraine. I studied international relations and political science in college, so I had a guest of the Great Powers Journal editor on, and we talked about the Russian and Ukrainian perspectives and what's likely to come out of the ongoing tensions. So every Sunday, if you're interested in foreign affairs and international relations, you can head on over to my channel. We'll have a great conversation and a little bit of fun. We have our average, at the end of the stream, we have something that's called Frog Facts, very Prudentialist on brand. So it's a good time for everybody.
Dynamite. I love it. Now, when Prudentialist and I set up this stream, we sort of wanted to sort of structure it around sort of the current status quo of the United States and sort of going on from there about sort of what positive vision can we sell for the future, if we can, if that's even needed, to what degree we can realistically fight the left politically, the plausibility of local and state politics versus national politics, parallelism in theory and practice, and just sort of wrap it up there. So I guess, Prudentialist, as what you might call a right-winger, how would you sum up the current situation of the United States of America?
Oh boy, what an incredibly loaded question. Politically,
is it bad?
No,
is it bad?
I mean, it's bad, but I mean, the degree it becomes at that point is to how bad is it? I mean, structurally, you've had a political rot that has been erasing more or less the political narrative of the country since the 1960s, and really, in theory, since the 13th Amendment. But since the 1960s onward, you've had an amendment that was talking about the rights of freed slaves being applied consecutively to virtually every social class and distinction and ill in society under the Equal Protections Clause, which in turn has erased the original founding narrative, sort of what Moldbug describes as a two-story state. And in doing so, you've also had this coupled with massive demographic shifts to where the majority demographic of the country is soon to be a minority inside its own country in a few years, which will make it politically disadvantageous for them to have any sort of national representation or to actually run the government, which of course is celebrated by their political opposition while also decried as a conspiracy theory. So now you have two sides acknowledging the same problem with nothing being done about it. And then, of course, those who actually, protested on the 6th of January over an election that was quote unquote fortified, you are now in a position where those people are being brought down with the full force of the American intelligence apparatus. So, actual on the ground protests are not doing well. Apparently, an individual in California was met by the California Highway Patrol for tweeting and criticizing the Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
God.
Not great, to say the least. As to where you go from here, I think is really going to be the question of the stream.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, there's kind of a bit of a sort of e-drama in sort of our corner of the internet right now. And I've made sort of a video, which you can find on my channel.
A very good video.
Thank you, sir. You're too kind. Sort of talking about where to sort of go, kind of at a theoretical angle. This is kind of, you could think of as sort of a sort of an addendum to that. So what I'm interested in tonight is not talking so much about nuts and bolts and theory and whatnot, but kind of assessing the situation and then maybe looking at real life examples of things people are doing and and seeing how that plays out in the real world, and whether or not that is ultimately futile will be your decision as an audience to make. But I figured a lot of the talk that we engage in is in our kind of corner of the internet is highly theoretical, which is good, but it can be at times sort of detached from what people are actually doing and have done in the past. So that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight. Not calling anybody out or anything. That's just, I figured it would be sort of beneficial for all people involved to sort of kind of attack it from this angle. Now, as to my personal interpretation of the current political situation, I think it's absolutely frightful, the current state of the United States. I have recently, I do not consider myself NRX, but I have recently read both Moldbug's, what would you call it? How Dawkins Got Pwned and Open Letter to an Open-Minded Progressive. And I think his assessment of the situation in terms of the structural nature of the United States is largely correct. I do believe that we're facing a sort of a disparate sort of self-reinforcing system without necessarily any elite sort of pulling, calling the shots and whatnot. The thing that I sort of add to this, though, and which isn't really talked about in Moldbug, however, is the kind of money-powered interest behind this. If you look at the United States historically, going back, over 100 years ago, you had communist communism was the hot shit idea among the people that were cool, right? That is true, and Moldbug does talk about this, but the degree to which money power and global finance is behind this sort of driving, centralizing force in American politics has been around for a very long time, and it's explicitly ideological. So yes, the cathedral as a structure, if we could call it that. I personally like cathedrals, so I don't like using that term. But the cathedral, as Moldbug calls it, is a decentralized structure, but I believe it would be imprudent, if I can use a phrase, to disconnect it from the moneyed interest behind it. So if, just as an example, this is how the churches got subverted, okay? So for all the neo-pagans who are just like, oh, it's because Christianity isn't based that it is the way it is. Well, the problem with that is the United States, the Rockefellers, as one example, funded ecumenism across the churches. And the idea was to sort of water down, unify, and liberalize the churches. And the way they did that and the way they got influence over these seminaries and whatnot is by flooding these institutions with their money. So on the one hand, these institutions will take the money from these foundations and et cetera. But on the back end of it, they're sort of owned by, or they owe their meal ticket to these larger foundations and whatnot. So yes, the cathedral as a structure is real. Yes, Moldbug is correct about that. But I think if you sort of look at the United States apart from, dare I say, a conspiratorial element to some degree, I think you're missing the whole picture. As to kind of where, how to deal with this and predicting what exactly will happen, it's a bit difficult because one guy that I sort of cite on this is a South African guy who is head of the South African Institute of Race Relations. His name is Frans Cronje, and he specializes in complex systems analysis. Okay, and the problem with any complex system is your ability to a complex system like the United States political system, for instance. The problem with the complex system analysis is there are simply too many variables to know exactly how the situation is going to play out in the future. And the best way to sort of prepare is not by forecasting, but by making sort of a list of plausible scenarios and preparing for each accordingly, right? So as an example of the lack of sort of forecasting showing itself is the Soviet Union, of course. Everyone, in the early 80s thought this thing was going to last for, into perpetuity. And also the same thing in South Africa. So in I believe it was 84, P.V.R. Botha, the president of South Africa, gave a speech where he's like, I'm not going to give up, white South Africa is not going to give up its place in the sun, essentially. And then what ended up happening is in very short time after that, the system was sort of dismantled, partially from the outside, it must be said. But it was sort of a reaction to a whole host of things. And same thing with China. Like, you couldn't necessarily predict that the CCP, 70 years ago or 60 years ago would end up where it is today. Because we have examples of all kinds of regimes which followed a communist model, including North Korea, which persist in very different forms. So I guess that's where I would just sort of lay the groundwork. So yes, in closing, I feel like I've been really long-winded, but in closing, Moldbug is largely correct. But the issue is we got to sort of I think we need to sort of take a look at some of the players behind the curtains. And although I believe his analysis of the current situation is correct in essence, the problem is predicting a complex system like the United States is problematic. So, Prudentialist, you got anything to say about those few points?
I would say that the money, of course, is definitely something that needs to be focused on. We talk about, you hear from American politicians all the time that, campaign finance reform is essential. And to me, I find it funny that the moneyed class, which primarily is, of course, the economic driver that sends things ever leftward culturally, was applauded and lauded in 2010 with the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. And I kind of find it as a poetic irony that the right politically as an institution has now had its, a good chunk of its ass bitten out of it from the very same moneyed hands that would finance their campaigns and mega donors and so on and so forth. Keep in mind that Wall Street went on a 5-1 basis for Biden over Trump in the 2020 election. And this is regardless of the fact that it dealt with, said fortifications, vote by mail, etc. So the moneyed interest, I think, is a very important factor that needs to be considered. The way that you fix that, however, I do not think with the current structure legally, and of course without changing Supreme Court precedent, that you can get it to function inside of the current regime.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So the part where I would absolutely agree with Moldbug and Academic Agent et al. Is that the trying to fix the American regime as it exists, sort of playing by its rules, is a fruitless effort, essentially. Voting harder in national elections, supposing that's the only thing you do, right? But voting harder in national elections and only doing that is not going to yield the results that we're looking for. And as we see, sort of culturally, the left is getting more and more insane, essentially. And I guess kind of the thing that we need to think about, and the I think the hurdle we have to sort of get over to sort of take this from theory to practice is to think of some way that we can kind of unite behind some sort of goals, right? So what you and I were talking about is the idea of sort of having a positive vision that we can sell for the future. And I don't necessarily believe that you need to sell this to the masses, but you need to sell it to people who matter, right? So, and whether this is like finding rogue elites or creating our own and then being able to sell a vision to them, it could definitely be that. But what do you think is the necessity of sort of having a positive vision to sell for society to at least the right kind of people?
So I think there's a few things that need to be approached when asking a question about positive vision. One, I think you need to acknowledge, for most of us, we need to acknowledge sort of our place in things. Unless you are of considerable means, a business owner, or you wake up one day and you win the lottery and you've got $50 million that you can invest in towards something of a pertinent political cause, you're an average Joe. For so many of us, we are the plebeians as described in AA's video. And if you acknowledge that, fine. However, as I've said on my videos and conversations on this issue, that does not mean that you live your life like all the other bugmen out there. This means that you try and serve yourself as a paragon of virtue, because even though systemically things will usually be changed in a top-down approach because popular revolutions are always astroturfed, that doesn't mean that you can't do things to improve your immediate local area. This means working with your school board. This means being a good neighbor. This means being an active participant in your kids' lives and being married and not eating the crap food that makes you flabby and lazy. As in terms of a positive vision, I think it is necessary for the populace at large to have a positive outlook and to provide an alternative to what currently exists. And I say this because rogue elites and those who have the means to change things are going to look at this from a very economic perspective. They are going to have to see whether or not this is worth hedging their bets against the current regime and betting that the system will fail. And to do so, they need a reason to short their money and their support and their power against the current regime. And I think that's why it's important for us to have a positive vision, or at the very least an alternative vision of what the world should be outside of what currently exists, of what you would call woke techno-capital or globo-homo, as it's often referred to. So to make a long story short, acknowledge who you are and what you can do, work within your immediate vicinity, and do create a positive vision, or at least an alternative vision to what currently exists, so that those at the top have a reason to bet against the system.
I think that's a very good point. Yes. So I think that's a very the fact that most elites will be looking at the current situation in economic terms, right? And we can agree or disagree about whether this is ideal or not. We would prefer to have the based and red pilled sort of idealist kind of billionaire on our side, right? But I think you're correct in that most sort of rogue elites throughout history are kind of looking at dollars and cents to a certain degree, and being able to offer them sort of a better deal, I think is good. Now, an interesting idea and something I haven't really done is, looking at kind of who wins and loses in the who in business, right? So, or business sectors, which business sectors sort of win and lose in the current political paradigm, finding the losers and then trying to, parlay with them to a certain extent. But the problem with that is, like, I'm not sure if it's, I'm going to be polite here for YouTube, but I'm not sure if what they're willing to back would be radical or transformative enough, right? So because the problem that I think we have is one of ideology to a certain extent, where the chains of liberalism have so firmly sort of wrapped the minds of most people that it's a bit of a problem to sort of try and break over that. But I think that as things get increasingly worse and the amount of losers to the current order becomes ever larger, I think there might be more opportunity to sort of make headway with these sorts of players who matter. What's your take on that?
I would say that identifying the losers, I think, is difficult because primarily the losers are the plebs, the American working class, who have been shafted by globalism for over 35 years now. And we had a referendum on that in 2016, and the system said nope. And federal elections now are questionable at best. As for the idea of those losers or those potential rogue elites who may find more radical, let's do things in Minecraft sort of solutions to not be very pleasant, I'm reminded of what Moldbug had said in a recent piece on his Substack, Grey Mirror, talking about the fact that whatever is going to come to replace this will have to learn how to harness low energy politics. People that stormed the Capitol on the 6th were acting like they stormed the Bastille, yet they stayed inside the guides, waved hello to the cops, and the cops let them in. And so it's important to realize that, American political engagement is just going to the occasional protest, going to the occasional rally, and doing the ritualistic thing of voting. So you need to, working within the system to change it is very highly, it adds more life force to the zombie, as someone says. However, you need to get a majority of the people, that includes the plebs, as well as those potential rogue aristocrats, to be okay with the idea that we can transform the system. I think of the idea of Cathargo delenda est over and over and over again. If you can say that over and over again and get the idea in people's minds, you can eventually get people to go to war with Carthage. And if you can say something along the lines of the cathedral delenda est over and over and over again, people would be okay with changing the system and harnessing that low energy that exists in sort of the modern electorate is going to be a path forward, I think, by channeling, what exists to get people's minds amenable to something different than just, classical liberal democracy. Yeah,
I would agree. One thing that I heard recently was a conversation that Dr. Paul Gottfried was having on his show with Joseph Ford Cotto. And they were talking about sort of the future of the right in America going forward. Joseph Cotto had a more negative belief about what sort of lay in store for America in the long run. Dr. Gottfried, his idea was a bit more, it was interesting because I think he recognized the sort of futility of trying to fix the system as it currently exists, right? And that, he made note of the fortification, right, in 2020. but or I'm sorry, in February. Damn, I don't know. It seems like it was forever ago. But the election fortification. He also mentioned the problem with sort of woke capital and the sort of institutions of the media and education and their ability to sort of mold public opinion and whatnot. But what he said was likely to happen is that as the as things go forward, the right in America that's going to emerge is going to be much less ideological driven and much more united by their hatred of the left, essentially. So it's going to become much more sort of Schmittian in that sense, much more friends good, enemies bad, more so than what passed for ideological conservatism in the United States. And the way that it's going to be able to support itself going into the future is essentially not secessionism, but sort of kind of what you find like here in South Africa a little bit, sort of regional de facto secessionism, right? So that the certain states that are not, let's say California or New York, in flyover country and parts of the South, will abrogate certain powers to themselves and will also cease to comply with certain edicts of Washington, whether or not, Washington claims to have authority to make such decisions. So they'll simply just become more and more intransigent vis-a-vis Washington, D.C. And I think that's sort of an interesting idea about the future. And the way that you manage to do that, obviously, is by focusing on local political matters and trying to make sure that your little machine in your town and, even at the state level functions properly.
Let me see. It's just my concern principally is that anyone who's a student of history, at least for American history, would know that any time that there's sort of a nullification crisis or an attempt to sort of ignore federal edicts is usually the depending on the power of the state or the power of the governments in place. They usually get clamped down pretty hard. And what's worse is that since FDR until present day, there's been so much federal authority that used to be state and local authority that's been ceded to the federal government, particularly the executive branch, that I feel like despite these, attempts of resistance, so like some states that are already watering down these laws about, oh, well, we won't accept illegal immigrants that get shipped to the Biden administration in our state, despite the fact that it doesn't say anything about like quote unquote minors or things like that. That the federal government will clamp down. And as we've noticed from the Civil War onward, is that secession's not an option because the last time that secession was tried, it led to a war that killed 600,000 people. And so when I hear these concerns about, balkanization or the sort of nice, polite divorce, that would be nice. It would be nice for red and blue America to amicably become more local in government and in nature, and to return back to the era of sort of the Articles of Confederation. Will that ever happen? Most likely not. It's nice to propose an alternative, but the things that I'm concerned about when we talk about, say, balkanization or having someone else take over or a foreign power helping topple the certain system is that, one, you would be seeing a comparable national security disaster equal to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So foreign powers intervening in regards to nuclear weapons, whatever the military will do. And of course, one has to look at sort of the other atrocities committed by other countries in previous conflicts to be concerned about, based China or based Russia, trying to liberate, us flyover state people. As for channeling efforts to change things, I think that localism and being as self-sufficient as possible will definitely help. However, and I'll have a video on this this week, the exits are being closed off. I'm not talking about just your physical ability to leave, because I mean, people can still leave California and New York and other shithole blue cities like they want to. But I mean, they want, a vehicle mileage tax, so trucking and rural industry will be destroyed. They want you to be more focused on electric cars that you don't actually own, because Tesla argues that you can't own the software inside of your Tesla Model S. And of course, even places like Amazon are suing, people because they say that they own the movies that they bought on the Amazon Prime service, and they say that you don't. So ownership and self-sufficiency are the greatest ways of exit and being out of the system. And I think that the regime is aware of that. They're closing down on it, which is why if we are going to come up and get our act together, we do need to act quickly.
No, I would agree with that. I think we're kind of running on borrowed time to a certain extent. And you're right. The thing with nullification is it does invite some degree of federal crackdown. And I don't expect there to be, it depends on sort of how radical it is. So I think the federal government is willing to tolerate a certain degree of pushback from the states. It tolerates it now. It's tolerated it in the past. But if it gets more heated, that is an interesting scenario, right? And maybe one that might get a little spicy. But the thing is, and the big problem I see with too much pushback from the state level is the states are addicted to money coming from Washington, right? And as we see in the United States, the federal government's ability to sort of tactically threaten to withdraw federal funds gets a lot of compliance. So the reason, and just as an example of this, the reason why the drinking age in the United States across all the states is 21 years old is because that requirement was linked to getting funding from the Department of Transportation, right? So they're saying, yes, your state constitution or the federal constitution does not say that we can, it does not say that we can decide a federal drinking age. However, you want billions of dollars for infrastructure projects. Well, if you want it, you're going to have a 21 year drinking age. And as a result, in short order, all the states got in line behind this. So I think the addiction to money from the federal government and as sort of as client states to the central authority is going to be a big problem both now and going forward in terms of creating any sort of real change.
Yeah, and to expand on my point, like even though sort of the windows for these sort of things are being closed rather quickly, I think in the future, the fact that the federalism framework hasn't been completely abolished yet or removed, and like it's not completely unitary, our forms of government, that provides sort of the Americans at least the greatest advantage is that there's still a legal framework for pushback under the 9th and 10th Amendments, because even though the Constitution itself has been trampled upon, edited, selectively reinterpreted for whatever the political, needs of the day are, those things are still existing by the regime, and to an extent, the regime still has to play by those rules. So it does play a significant factor for future legal battles for, people to fight back in the future. However, yes, coercive federalism, as it's known, the federal government wielding tax dollars over the states in order to comply, like with the drinking age and other regulations, is definitely a problem. And of course, the reason why states don't do it is because it's billions and billions of dollars that they don't have to raise on their own, which means higher taxes, which means people and businesses leave. This is why you get people like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis always cheering on Twitter when another lefty tech company moves to their states. It's the reason why Texas is turning more and more purple. But yeah, I mean, federalism, the coercive federalism money problem will be an issue, but I think there might come a point where things are going to get so bad that eventually someone's just going to say, damn it, with the consequences. and try and go forward on their own. And I mean, the benefit is political.
You mean a state?
Well, states in terms of like maybe their legislatures, like,
Right.
I mean, the benefit right now is that if you compare like the national GOP in the federal Congress, they're a joke compared to some of the more, you know, right wing based and red pilled things that you'll see come out of like state legislatures. Like Texas just recently passed like open constitutional carry and like banning transgender like therapy to kids. So, I mean, obviously, at least someone more locally is willing to fight. And the best thing is that those people more locally are far more responsive to the actual citizenry than your national representative.
Yeah, that is true. So I guess sort of in wrapping up the kind of positive vision thing, I guess the main thing that we'd be trying to sell people is anti-leftism is essentially it. So whatever the current regime is going to hopefully, it already has proceeded to a point where it's alienated big chunks of the country, right? And I know there's a lot of hate out there for normies and whatnot, but a lot of normies, they don't like the status quo at all. They don't particularly like gay marriage. They don't particularly like open borders, especially. They don't particularly like some of the regulations coming out of DC, which make it harder for them to run their small businesses or find work or whatever. So these are not ideological people. They're pragmatic, and they're seeing their concerns and wishes routinely shat upon by a totally intransigent Washington, D.C. So I think there's hay to make with these people. And, we sort of saw that in the Trump election. Now, of course, the problem is that, what Trump was trying to do, and ultimately why it failed, is he was just like a moderate reformer at the end of the day. Now, some people say Trump didn't do nothing for us. I don't think that's entirely true. The great thing that he did is he helped sort of pull the mask off this whole cabal, essentially. So it's not so much what he did, but sort of the reaction to Trumpism was probably the best thing that Trump did for the American public, right? And I think a lot of people were sort of made aware of that through the Trump presidency. But the problem that Trump had is he fundamentally was just a moderate reformer, and he didn't really want to make any big deal changes. He didn't want to like dynamite, the alphabet agencies and sort of, and sort of be like a reverse FDR or something who is willing to like wield real authority and, ask questions about constitutionality later, essentially. So I guess kind of the positive vision that, we have to sell is, essentially being against the left. Now, that the problem with that is it's not really positive, right? So it's more of a negative vision that we'd be selling at that point. So do you sort of think that's kind of what it's going to have to be? Unfortunately, is we're going to have to be sort of a negative force ideologically, or is there some sort of positive way that we could maybe get in contact with like-minded rogue elites, for example?
Well, I mean, I think one of the first things I ever talked about that kind of inspired me to do the channel and to give commentary was just there was, I think AA has a definition of what it means to be, I guess, on the right, and he calls it anti-progressive. And I adhere more to, if you've seen the Distributists video, to be right-wing in 9 points. Dave goes into detail discussing sort of the things that make people on the right. And one of them, of course, is sort of this teleological aspect about wanting to live a good life and what that means. And I mean, as normie and as basic tier as it may be, I think you need to have a positive vision. So, like, what are some of the more core tenets of what we associate with right-wing people? You know, dads grilling, people taking care of their kids, a married family that actually stays together, not just for the children and loves each other, goes to church on Sundays or whatever religious faith that they adhere to, you know, and is a productive, you know, tax-paying member of society. These are the most basic, bare-bones things that you can associate with someone who might have right-leaning tendencies. And honestly, I think you need a positive vision. I can go out every day, all day. I can make comments and I can make snarky tweets dunking on the left and how stupid they are. But you have to ask yourself, what do you offer as the alternative? And I think that's why a positive vision has to be necessary, because I can tell you what a terrible, terrible deal the left is, how bad sort of this liberal system is, how bad this whole consent autonomy framework has been for society and its consequences. But if I cannot provide you a viable alternative that is both A, persuasive, and B, actually effective in practice, then it's not going to be, it'll be all for naught. At that point, you'll be essentially what the Republican Party is nowadays, is that someone who eternally wags their finger saying they've gone too far this time, but never does anything in response. You can be anti whatever you want, but you have to be for something in order to do it. Simply being against something doesn't imply that you're for the other.
No, I agree with that. I guess just I guess maybe to put a finer point on it, what do you think plausibly could that positive vision be? In a way that's not LARPy, right? So,
well, yeah, right. Because I mean,
we're going to be the new Knights Templar. Let's join us in our crusade, right?
Sure.
Something that is authentically right wing, but also, you know, could be digestible to at least a minority chunk of the American people, for example.
I mean, and that becomes the difficult thing, right? And I think this is something that the right, I don't know, has 100% agreement on. And so, like, the biggest thing that you'll hear from everyone from like Nick Land to Don the Pleb is that the right has so many different versions of what the right is. We'll all end up in a room together and we'll come up with 15 reasons why we shouldn't do X and why X is a bad idea, even though we're all for X, which of course is a problem. And so my issue to me, right, for creating a positive vision that's not LARPy or anything like that is, of course, my concern primarily being you need a vision that can get those rogue elites to see that, oh, there's quite a few people that like this. We can hedge our bets and bet against the system. And to me, I think with the current demographic trends, it will be religious in nature, partially, but also, you know, in terms of traditional politics, I still think the greatest coalition to strike back against what we call, you know, global homo or the cathedral is sort of that working class coalition. The Pew Research Center has done work that says, you know, more and more Hispanics are becoming less Catholic and more evangelical in nature. There's still that, you know, Christian identity that still exists in the United States. I think that can be targeted, especially with a growing Hispanic demographic in the country. I think that, you know, focusing on the local issues that matter requires, of course, at the end of the day, on the ground activism, and you need to work very quickly to provide that vision. So like people like Yiz the Eunuch, for example, actually go out and complain and protest about what's going on in the universities and what gets taught to their kids. I think that you need to exhibit and be more vocal. Because as I've always said, the difference between a right-leaning young person and a left-leaning young person is that the left-leaning young person is willing to go out and canvass for Bernie Sanders. The right-leaning young person is more likely to share Pepe memes and shitpost on Twitter. And there's a fundamental on-the-ground disparity that partially contributes to why we lose, and that needs to change. And I mean, the things to consider with all of that is that these systems in place, you know, they need to focus on things like social protections for the family. They need to, the right needs to drop, I think, some of its more, you know, predilections for neoliberal economics and not to say, the meme return, but revert back to a time of a prior system. I think that, the disaster that has been neoliberal globalist economics has been clearly demonstrated to the average Joe that, hey, you get replaced by cheap immigrant labor. We've got like nearly 20 million of those kind of people living inside the United States as a serf class. We've clearly got a problem that's not good for them. It's not good for us. We obviously need to come to the conclusion that something needs to be done about it.
Yeah, I agree. And just sort of I think that was very well put. And, some people will disagree with this. I don't care. But I think fundamentally, in terms of a positive vision for society and what that looks like, is going to have to be built around a core of Christianity. It's in some form or another. Now, you'll have various regional flavors of what that is. But I think some sort of religious fundamentalism kind of being at the heart of what it is we're trying to do is, I think, the only thing that will really capture the imaginations of enough people. And not because it's, tactically sound, but I think because it's true, right? The truth is very attractive to people when it's presented in a way that is not limp-wristed, that is not kowtowing, which says, this is what I believe and why I believe it. And all you heretics are wrong. You guys are worshiping Mammon, this sort of stuff. It's like real. And again, like this won't be sold to everybody, right? Like, we're not going to get everybody on board, but I think by having sort of something that is rooted in America's past and at least has a hold on the present with a big chunk of people, and being able to sort of unabashedly live that and try to propagate that, I think it's going to have to be the core of sort of what drives it forward. So it's the negative aspect. And the thing which a lot of people can sort of get on board on, of course, is the anti-leftism, anti-progressivism. But the positive aspect, I think, is going to have to be more, it's going to have to be fundamentally religious, right? Just as progressivism is a religion. Yeah. So progressivism is not just an idea to most people, right? To the people, like you say, who go around knocking on doors for, vote for Bernie and whatever, what they believe is not 1 + 1 = 2. What they believe is, I am serving the greater good in the best way I know how, and it's going to yield a better world for all of us. And I think that has to be the case for us as well. But it has to be sort of have, fundamentally healthy soil and deeper roots.
I agree. And I mean, the Christian framework is fundamental to Western civilization. Whether as more people become secular, sure, but you're still adopting laws, customs, traditions, all based on that. And I think that still, to a significant degree, resonates. And I'm not saying bring prayer back in schools, because my issue with the separation of church and state is that I do not need the government mandating how one practices said faith, or using the power of the purse or the tax dollar to do so, which is why it exists. But that does not mean that you separate church from, society, or you separate it there. And I'm not saying you mandate people to go to church. You mandate people to know the gospel. I'm not advocating for theocracy or integralism. What I advocate for in this instance is that these things are fundamental to Western civilization. These things are fundamental to living a good life. We've done pretty damn well with it for the last 2,000 years. The teachings of Christ are fundamental. He is your savior. And, you don't have to believe in him, but however, the rules and values and everything of the society you live in, adhere to those. And those do need to make a prominent comeback. Now, of course, the big caveat that you'll see here is well, you'll get the traditional progressive meme of, oh, right-wing politician does something that's not socially conservative. Look at this hypocrite, ha ha ha. And I'm not saying like live a virtuous life, but also be aware that you have vices and that you have problems. Like I said it before in a video of mine called "I Have Not Yet Begun." Like I've got my own flaws. Like I spend too much time on my gaming PC. I like dating women whose politics I can't fucking stand because they're progressives, and I like the partisan hate sex. But like I'm aware of those flaws. I'm going to preach to live a better life, and I'll try and do self improvement. But I know down that I'm not perfect, so I'm not going to let them use that as ammunition against me. So, I mean, I agree with you in the aspect that, yeah, there's going to be a Christian framework behind it, but that doesn't necessarily mean full-on theocracy or LARPing, because it's got to be grounded in realism.
Yeah. No, it can be a LARP. And the thing, too, is like, even if the ideal of the LARP is good, right? We don't live in a world in which the LARP can manifest itself. And I think that's essentially the problem that we have, right? So let's suppose you're a trad, Catholic monarchist, or a restorationist or whatever. You may be right, but we don't even live in a world where that's even an option for most people. You know what I mean? So like it puts us in a tricky position. So now, going on to sort of our next question or topic of discussion, to what degree do you think we can realistically fight the left politically?
Locally and legally. And to expand upon that, for right now, I mean, in states where your federal elections still matter, by all means participate. Do not concede ground to the enemy when you can't. So that's something to consider. However, you are going to accomplish a lot more locally because local representatives, whether that's city council, county commissioners, the state legislatures, they will be far more, likely to bow to pressure from the right than, say, a national representative will. That does not mean you don't call your senator and you don't call your federal congressman. I'm just saying that do not, put all of your eggs in the federal basket. Now, legally, what I mean by that is like lawfare, for example. We talk a lot in our sphere of the internet about sort of how South Africa is the sort of future of the United States in terms of its racial attitudes. If that's the case, then the United States, especially people on the right, regardless of race, religion, or creed, should really start looking at what AfriForum does and what people like Conscious Caracol do, and become civil rights leaders for the minority, and become civil rights leaders for the political minority. And that's probably what's going to be necessary, because the United States operates within a framework, at least nominally, under common law. That means whatever victory you get, whatever precedent that you push forward, whatever appeal that you can get that wins is now precedent, and which means that can be used to generate legal momentum and more ground in the future. And this applies also to local elections. Even if you want to be, just the county tax assessor, and you're determining things like, revenues and where the money goes, that is another place for you to make a case for why the money shouldn't be going towards critical race theory in schools. It can be a reasoning as to why you shouldn't be raising property taxes this year, which is already killing most people to afford homes in the first place. So legally and locally are going to, the double L approach, I think, will help. This does not mean you abandon national politics, because national politics is a great way for the message to get across not just your local area, but across the country. And as we've noticed with critical race theory, especially, it's becoming a wedge issue in lily white New England, where they're like, oh shit, my 98% white state of New Hampshire or Vermont is getting some pushback from the affluent white liberals over critical race theory. Use these wedge issues to your advantage. All the more reason why we do need sort of an activist class like the left has. And ours, of course, will not be organic like theirs is, but at least nothing has more fervent, angry energy to be channeled than a 50-something-year-old conserva boomer in the United States who wears their white New Balances and grills. Like, those people have angry energy, and if you piss them off, they'll be good to use. So all you really need to do is to just teach them how to shitpost on Twitter and Facebook, and we're going to go somewhere. I say that last part with levity, but I mean, there's some argument to be made there.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Funny idea. So yeah, I would agree that engaging with the left politically is at this point kind of an asymmetric proposition, right? So for all the reasons that we've sort of talked about earlier, reasons outlined by Moldbug and whatnot, and everybody else, engaging with the left on the terms that they engage with us is not possible, right? So basically, in terms of national elections, trying to, just vote harder next time, guys. I don't think that's going to work. But what can happen is sort of engaging in sort of lawfare, engaging in local politics to, again, sort of act as a buffer between what's coming from DC and, doing your thing to sort of make sure that your local elections aren't fortified, I think is useful. And it's useful if for no other reason than it keeps your town, your county, your borough from becoming a shithole, right? So you're not going to revive the system this way, but what you can do is at least help make your area kind of a nice place to live, right? And so where I live, as probably everybody knows, is South Africa. And as bad, as shitty as things are here, there are still quite a few places in the province I live, especially, that are still quite nice places to live. It's harder to make money because of the national economic situation. Yes. You got to worry about squatter camps getting set up around your town, and, then having these people kind of, engage in crime and stuff. Yes. This is a problem. But despite all that, there are pockets and areas, and sometimes pretty large areas, that are still quite nice places to live. I know a lot of you have, maybe you believed the Lawrence Southern documentary that's all bad here. That's not the case. You do have bad areas, yes, and vast expanses of this country are shitholes. Absolutely, yes. But there are still pockets that manage to maintain themselves, and they will continue to probably maintain themselves, right? And the way that they do this is through local action, right? Because national politics literally is hopeless down here. And if the ANC dips below 50%, they're probably going to just form a coalition government with the black nationalist / Leninist economic freedom fighters. It's going to be bad shit. But what people have been doing is, as best as they can, sort of preserving where they are through local politics, through parallel institutions, and through just plain Jane like community involvement, right? So one of the things I talk about in my recent video is kind of where I live. And there's, compared to the United States, quite a lot of, sorry, I got to wet my whistle, quite a lot of local involvement. So just as an example, there's basically a private police station at the bottom of my hill, and they provide on the ground policing services or patrolling services. And they also have a private ambulance. There's also people who routinely do neighborhood watches. So again, just sort of having a physical presence. So that's actually one of the best ways to stop crime, is to have sort of visibility, right? So not responding to calls, but sort of being out there so that the call doesn't happen in the first place. That's another one. Another problem is with vagrants and homeless drunk people and stuff. And sort of a way that they've been trying to deal with that is they've created I'm not exactly sure what they call it, but they basically make them they give them a type of employment where they're essentially car guards, right? So around the shopping areas and whatnot, these people, a lot of them are drug addicts and drunks and whatnot, will be given an opportunity to sort of provide at least some degree of service to society and a income, not very good one, but better than nothing. And this has also helped kind of minimize the degree of, just sort of vagrancy to a certain extent. All these things are sort of in play here. And nationally, unfortunately, the power grid in South Africa is centralized, which results in routine blackouts because they turned Eskom into a massive patronage machine, which exists first to give jobs to friends and cronies, and second to provide electricity. And as a way to sort of get around this, the Western Cape province, along with its municipalities, are in the process now of trying to get off the grid or build their own parallel grid, or get electricity from independent power suppliers. So they're sort of doing, while still remaining within South Africa, right? So they're trying to do parallelism on a governmental level. And all these things, again, is not because they hope to sort of change the national government into something that would be better. I don't think, I'm not convinced that can happen here. But to preserve at least some degree of a good life for the people who live there.
I mean, there's an issue with, at least in the United States, for that to happen, is that one, in community policing, you run into, of course, the race issue. So, I mean, community policing, of course, I immediately think of Zimmerman and all that instance, what took place there, which essentially means that you can be assaulted and you can be abused, and depending on the color of your skin, even if you are a light-skinned Hispanic Cuban male, you're going to be declared the enemy, and they're going to get away with it. And we've seen that time and time again. So it's always funny when there's protests about, these criminals that get shot, when congratulations, they did things that probably warranted them getting shot, and they already had a record. It's not like you guys have ever found anybody who was shot by the police that in the heat of the moment it wasn't justified. Like, congratulations, thank you for making a martyr out of a criminal. But Americans are far too reliant on the police for any social problem that we have. And Mark Doppelganger in the chat has a really great thread on Twitter about this. Americans are not one to socially police themselves like they used to. We get like our masked Karens, and unfortunately those are literal NPCs. But outside of that, there's no real policing or community guidelines or community, groups and neighborhood watches, except for like wealthy middle-class suburbs that are usually white. And even then, if we were to, all of a sudden, if these people were to start organizing and do that, you would have the state clamp down on them. They'd probably be declared white supremacists, and you'd probably have a lovely visit from the police. So it becomes a little harder to do that in America because you're dependent upon the cops, and you're dependent upon the cops to also enforce social norms. But social norms aren't even properly enforced by certain members of the population in the U.S., which makes it all the more difficult to pull off. So I don't know if you've read The Dark Enlightenment by Nick Land, but he's got this great part in it called The Cracker Factory, talking about how for like white people, exit from the situation is racist. This is why the term white flight still gets used, because it's a pejorative. Even though these people are just trying to live a better life, have better schools for their kids and so on. Until America decouples itself from its over-dependence, both socially and legally, on the cops, and starts putting things back into their own hands again, we're going to get more and more problems like we're seeing now. Like that army sergeant that's currently in trouble for literally doing nothing, but then telling this punk kid who was sexually assaulting a teenage girl to like get the heck out of his neighborhood, who's got a history of criminal activity, and now has the cops literally doing nothing as BLM are literally putting signs and mobs at his front door in the suburbs. This is going to keep happening, and the police are not your friends. They are an apparatus of the state, and the state hates you. So you need to learn to decouple your dependency from backing the blue all the time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Now, there's a comment here from Le Pleuron. Are there incidents of black perps killed by white public or private cops all the time, which become scandals in South Africa, like the United States? Now, perhaps the only country which is maybe more racialized than the United States is South Africa. Things are racial politics here are big, right? But you actually see less incidents of what happens in, sort of like the George Floyd incidents in South Africa than in the United States. And I think there's a few reasons for this. The first reason is that in this country, most of the cops are Bantu, right? Most of them are black. In the Western Cape, that might not be the case. Most of them might be colored. And there's, a decent amount of cops in South Africa who are still white. But you don't really see George Floyd style pushback if a perpetrator is killed. Now, the other problem is, but most of the cops being black, I think it's sort of and the fact that the police force is so centralized in South Africa, that's another issue. So if there's a problem with the system, that reflects on the ANC, not some racist white Boer, out in the veld somewhere. So I think that's an issue. So if there is racism in policing, becomes a story or whatever, the problem with that is the line between cops and the national government is direct. And I don't think the ANC wants the police force delegitimized. And the other issue is that the police are largely, I hate to say it, largely useless in South Africa. And so them being a professional, competent, crime fighting unit is just not the case. There was a press announcement a while ago where the head of the South African police services, Becky Cele, he's like, yeah, we can't protect civilians against crime. Yeah, we just can't do it. And so we're like, okay, yeah, we know, but damn, did you have to say it out loud? And so I think the thing with South Africa is the need for private security here is just so manifest that to sort of go against that, I think is, it just wouldn't go anywhere. Like everybody needs private security. I mean, it's ubiquitous. There's almost 500,000 private security guards in this country compared to about 150,000 police officers. And that ratio is since 1994 when they used to be at parity. So, yeah. And yes, the question, what does colored mean? It means mixed race in South Africa. And specifically, they're usually Khoisan, so indigenous black South Africans, not the Bantus, like the Xhosas or the Zulus. And they're Khoisan, interbred with the Dutch white settlers predominantly, and also of Malaysian extract as well around Cape Town. And they speak Afrikaans as their primary language, like the Afrikaners, and I think about them as the Mexicans of Africa, essentially. And they are the biggest racial population in the Western Cape, and they do not get on well with the ANC. So that's them. Now, in terms of parallel or local politics, right? And kind of being able to offer some sort of resistance to the national state. A lot of people will say that this is ultimately hopeless. Cthulhu always swims left, all this sort of stuff. And the feds will just stomp on your head eventually at some point anyway. What's your response to that?
I mean, so as I said earlier, the advantage that we still have, at least in the United States, and I know this has been a very American-centric stream, is that like federalism still gives you cover, which helps. There's certain things that the Fed still can't do, which means, of course, play within your limited scope of responsibilities, whether it's an elected office, an appointed one, or your business. But I mean, getting elected to local positions, whether it's county tax assessor or whatnot, like I said earlier, it does generate another battleground for you to win on. And it gives you a platform to voice your opinion, to let people know that, hey, the system sucks. I have to play this game in order to even say anything about how bad the system is. But at least you then have a platform to speak from. And of course, I mean, it's not much, but I mean, you can be the best darn county tax assessor or the best darn city councilman ever, but at least you're using that platform to generate an alternative vision. And like I said earlier, if you can create an alternative vision that gets people interested in what you have to say and gets people interested in like, hey, maybe we don't have to have this crappy oligarchy disguised as a democracy, then, we can, do better. And at the very least, that gets the elite class interested in hedging their bets. I think that there's still something worthwhile in local positions. The saving grace, like I mentioned earlier, is that federalism is still a thing here in the U.S., so take advantage of it and do what you can to let people know that, hey, even if you're in a red state, like, you are committing essentially a rear guard action. And be aware of the fact that you're committing a rear guard action, because this is an asymmetrical conflict. You are prey and they are a predator. And you need to start acting like a gazelle or an antelope and make it almost impossible for the lion to catch you. And that's what you can do in these positions, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think what we're talking about with sort of local politics would be a much more difficult in a place like the UK, for instance. And I get why. I understand why they're a little bit black-pilled over there. And you could say, I am maybe a little black-pilled on the United States federal government as it currently exists as well. I don't think personally that it can be salvaged. But like you say, in the US specifically, we still have at least some degree of federalism, which the central government on paper at least has to give some credence to, right? And that does allow us to have some cover to sort of operate to some degree. And that's good in the sense that, like I said, I don't think it's going to salvage the system, but it can really help out where you live. That still does matter, right? Things aren't as centralized in the United States as they are in some other places, and you do have some room to sort of operate. And some people will say, well, it's hopeless. Why get involved? I'm like, well, it's easy to say that if you're a NEET who just sort of lives on the internet all day and whatnot, and you don't have to worry about adult things. But if you're a family man and you have concerns about the kind of life your kid is going to live, and whether or not your local community is safe, and whether or not your town is being run as a patronage network or delivering services. These are important things to you, right? And I think even in a hostile with a hostile national government, you can still affect some change there. And it's not the whole enchilada, but I mean, it does make your life objectively better. So why wouldn't you do it? Essentially.
Yeah, and to me, keep in mind that whatever your end goal is, whether you think that some aspect of the past can be recovered, I'm not inclined to believe that you can get a sort of a restoration type deal happening. I think that whatever comes next will have to be an acknowledgement of what's failed and then synthesizing something new from that. I think with how technology has happened, I don't think you can get the whole return to tradition sort of deal. I think that, for instance, like the internet has fundamentally changed how people interact. I don't think you could go back to old-fashioned traditional social norms. But I think the importance of these local positions and the importance of these of working within the system, at least locally, right, and trying to create a platform or an institution, is that you also buy time in terms of, you are committing yourself to a position, an elected office, or a position of authority that will have a lot of attention on you. You will be getting a lot of flack and a lot of media attention and a lot of unwanted attention from the mob. But in doing so, you are buying valuable time for someone to create an alternative platform or a parallel institution that will be vital for your ideology or your movement to succeed in the future. So what do I mean by this? I mean that, for all the flack that Sargon of Akkad gets, right? What has he done now? He has stopped really being Sargon of Akkad. He is now Carl Benjamin, founder and CEO of the Lotus Eaters podcast, and makes good money and is one of the top listened to podcasts inside the UK. And so even though he still considers himself a liberal, he is still pointing out the fact that, hey, shit's fucked in the UK. And here's what's going on, and here's why the conservatives are just as bad as Labor. And, whether it's talking about immigration or talking about, the grooming gangs report that was supposed to come out. But he has an alternative platform and an alternative institution that so far seems relatively cancel-proof. The same thing with Academic Agent. Academic Agent has the academic agency. He's literally trying to build an alternative institution to like your traditional university route. The reason why you need people to fight the existing culture war and fight within the existing system is that you buy these people time to get their things off the ground. You buy them the legal framework so they can exist and not get canceled or have the banks cancel on them. You are committing the most important rearguard action in the history of politics, and that is to buy these people time. You may fall on the sword, and that is not going, that's a risk that you have to be willing to acknowledge. Can you take? And so when Mr. Patriarch's talking about the things about why you should be concerned, there's a reason why you'll hear a lot of righties tell you have kids, because the only way that you're ever going to be concerned about the future is that if you have skin in the game. And that's, to me, important to have. And so I think it becomes a way and mean for us to work and create a pathway forward. Even though these people that create these alternate institutions, they may not be, to the right enough for you or to have a world where everything works that way. I think it's important for you to have these institutions be created so you can push back on them once they're up and running. Because if they're even nominally your friend in the basic bare bones friend-enemy distinction, even if you disagree with them on, say, 15% of things, you can, once they're up and running and they can do the job, then great, we can talk about the 15%, but we need to get them up and running first. And I think that's why we need to work on getting that, these institutions up. And that's why we need to engage locally and engage in these offices, because you are buying them time. This is a rear guard action. And in doing so, we can get these things up and running, and then we can push them in the right direction that we want to about changing the system, changing the regime, or getting people on there. Because the rogue elites that we like, for instance, I am I get sympathetic to the ideas of Peter Thiel, even though I have some issues with him. Like, Peter Thiel still works within the system, and he'll drop like $10 million on like J.D. Vance's Senate campaign in Ohio. That's great. But God knows that Peter Thiel, if given the alternate vision where he could spend his money and spend his capital, could like change things up. It would be fantastic to push him in that direction. But yeah, I can see why there's some concerns about how they might be turned into useless sinecures. And that's why you need to be just as adamant on pushing them in the directions you want as you would with the directions that you want, your normie friends or your local offices to be. And I just saw that Mr. Patriarch put that little comment up about AA, that he moved from John Stuart Mill to Rene Guyon in like 3 years. Yeah, it's been one heck of a transformation. I've been watching AA and people like him for a long time now. When I think I've followed him when he was like on my personal account when he had just a couple of thousand subs. Yeah, he's far more based than he was 3 years ago.
Yeah, to say the least. And I think a lot of us have sort of like, especially since 2016, have kind of gone through transformation and kind of our circles on the internet, right? So like I made a video sort of about this, like how I became a right winger, part 1 and 2. And it's kind of, it's weird how this happens. And, there were some influences like, academic agent and whatnot, but in a way it almost happened like kind of independent of like that, right? So it's all sort of connected, but like with me, it was more just sort of thinking out sort of my ANCAP libertarian ideas a little bit more and having them clash with reality, and sort of seeing, like, moving to Africa and sort of seeing, oh shit, like maybe this doesn't work here. Wait, if it doesn't work here, maybe it's not a universal idea that will work. And, and also sort of getting in touch with more kind of traditionalist versions of Christianity. It's people come to these sort of conclusions in various different ways, but it's like what is it, the old I guess there's a libertarian reactionary pipeline. There is, like, and I think a lot of us were there at some point. But someone sort of in the comments here talking about Sargon's side operation. I think Sargon's, he is going to take, some sort of heat and whatnot for his thing, but I commend him for his efforts, because at least he's winning, right? In his own small way. He's not a billionaire who's going to bankroll the transformation or anything, but he is, despite the odds, managed to carve out a little space for himself and sell his ideas, as milquetoast as some of us may think they might be. Nevertheless, he is right on a lot of things, and I believe he is definitely an honest actor, which is more than we could say for most people. And not only that, but he facilitates. What does he facilitate? The libertarian to reactionary pipeline, right? So Sargon was marijuana for a lot of people before turning to like Evolian crack. That's not a bad thing. So now, I guess to sort of tie off on sort of our more serious discussion for tonight, you ended off by talking about parallelism, right? So, and kind of, gave Sargon as an example, the academic agency as an example. These are small things, but they're also big things. And before I kind of go to that, what do you think are the hurdles that we have to get over with parallelism, and how do you think lawfare ties in with successful parallelism?
So lawfare, I think, is definitely undervalued, at least in the United States and other parts of the West. And I can understand as to why, because it's expensive and that requires organization and fundraising. And of course, the fundraising comes with its own concerns because, payment processors and all that. But Because we will work in a common law system, any legal victory that you can ascertain can then be used to generate momentum for future legal challenges, either for your movement or for other cases as well. And we know this because other legal precedent that exists in the United States come from precedents that had nothing to do with their original case. And that's how, the invented right of privacy gets used from everything to gay marriage to anti-sodomy laws. The same thing in terms of the common law system can be applied if we do it on the right. I've recently talked about a job I might take up, which is for a religious freedom organization, and I'll leave it at that. But it's a legal, arm. It's a nonprofit that deals with right-wing things, and it's just like that is an underappreciated and undervalued tool that the right has. Despite some of us that are working class and whatnot, an education, while expensive in the U.S., is still accessible, which means that we should probably be taking advantage of knowing how to work the law, knowing how to work the legal system, and getting an education to become an attorney and to fight off and to do those things. And of course, networking. So, knowing business development and knowing the law will help. Lawfare will give you the legal victories that will give you sort of the enshrined protections in the system, so that whatever institution that you decide to create or participate in, it has a legal means of defending itself, and it has a framework to defend itself and to, function and survive. So lawfare, I think, is incredibly important, and I think that Americans and other Westerners should be looking at AfriForum and, what's happening in South Africa and trying to emulate that here in the United States, because whether we like it or not, global Zimbabwe, global South Africa, it's coming.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I like to, and there's other people who do a lot more better stuff on this than me, but a guy that you guys should check out is Conscious Caracal, whose real name, I'm not doxing him. This is public. His real name is Ernst van Zyl. And he's got a lot of great stuff. Guy. Yeah, he is. And he's got a lot of great stuff on this sort of material. And I think what a lot of people don't get is that parallelism and lawfare, successful parallelism and lawfare, kind of go hand in hand. They have to a certain extent, once you get to a certain size, unless you want to do agorism or something like that. But the reason why you don't see agorism is because it's not plausible, I don't think. Now, the thing that South Africa has done, of course, I've talked about a lot, I don't want to make this the South Africa stream, but it does have a lot of successful parallelist organizations, as hostile as the national government of South Africa is to anything that is decent. Organizations like AfriForum are able to organize predominantly Afrikaners, it must be admitted, but some coloreds and people, anyone who really wants to sort of buy in, right? So AfriForum, it's not just it's not some exclusive, you have to, you have to be an Afrikaner to be part of this organization. No. It is predominantly Afrikaner, but I got English or Anglo South African friends who chip in. There are colored people who chip in, and they've even helped out. They even have black members and whatnot, and they help out all kinds of cases. And what they're able to do is they're able to help. The AfriForum is the legal arm of parallelism in South Africa, essentially. That's what they do. So they're the ones who are trying to help minority rights as best as they can and maintain them. And you could say, well, it's a lost cause. Well, again, like I said, it's important. It's important when you live here. And they do make some gains and successes. And they also help parallelism succeed. So there was an Afrikaans. So one of the things that the national government here did is they basically banned Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in all universities in the country. Now, this is a problem because there are, of course, a lot of people in this country who speak Afrikaans. I believe it's the third most common spoken first language after Xhosa and Zulu. So it's not like just some dinky small minority language here. It's important. And to sort of get around this, what happened is you have a unification between Solidarité, which is a trade union, but not like the lefty kind of more of a, like, don't screw over our workers and don't try to racially discriminate against them too much sort of trade union. And they sort of literally crowdfunded a university, or I'm sorry, a technical college. And they're in the process of crowdfunding a university right now, which will do instruction in Afrikaans. Now, if you're going to be building something like a technical college or a university, you're inevitably going to have to deal with some degree of politicking, right? Even if it's just like permits and shit like that. And there is also pushback from some NGO, shit ass NGOs and whatnot about, this is going to be exclusionary because it's an Afrikaans, and this is like backdoor racism. And AfriForum was there to sort of like bat all this stuff down, be like, no, here's the Constitution, and you guys may treat it like toilet paper, but we have a right to build our own technical college, for example. And so they did it. They achieved a big thing with that, and they also help organize security in rural communities. So like farm murders and stuff. That's bad shit. That's nothing to be worried about. And they're right now they have a security wing, which is dedicated to organizing security in these rural areas. Right now, something that I think we don't necessarily have to worry about that in the United States, at least yet. But another organization that exists. Sorry, my that's some water, Mr. Patriarch. Yeah. Sorry. Like I said, wild weekend, and it's late here. My voice is shot. But there is an organization which exists called Sakaliga. And what they are is they're essentially a business organization. And they think about, like, Academic Agent talked about things built by ourselves for ourselves, right? And that's kind of what Sakaliga is. So it's a collection of businesses which want to protect themselves and kind of essentially form a trust and do business amongst themselves and organize, and work toward shared goals for all the organizations. And that's what Sakaliga is. And they're also, again, much more. They're able to sort of pack a lot more of a wallop than just some individual business owner who's like commiserating with another guy who got screwed over somehow. So that's another thing that I think you could look at doing in the United States, and maybe that should be kind of our first step, is trying to build these. We already have a lot of existing institutions in the United States, but essentially trying to unionize them through something kind of like Sakaliga, I think might be an interesting idea.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, thankfully, however, I guess people who have been punched or hit that have been made targets I think are kind of recognizing that. I mean, for whatever crap you might want to give to my pillow man, Mike Lindell, I mean, if he wants to build some sort of alternative to Amazon, I'm going to welcome it. And I'm all for it. So I do think that in the future that will happen. However, it requires us to have one meaningful, well-organized, well-managed institution, as Le Perron points out in the chat here. We need to start somewhere before we can even get to that point. And I think that becomes the importance of an effective rearguard action, developing these institutions for their own, letting them flourish and get off the ground at the least. That way you can organize them collectively through, national and state and local frameworks of, networking, business support, and lawfare. These will take time, of course. And, we will have to take the time in order to build them, and take the time to push those that are sympathetic to our cause in such a direction that you can get them to do what we need them to do. So, I think Mike Lindell, ironically enough, might be a good example to use in the future. But of course, it also becomes to the concern about, geography. Like you said, the Western Cape is very vital for South Africa, and it's proof that localism matters. And I mean, it's the same thing for, blue state and red state perspectives. And I've lived in blue, cities, and I've lived in major democratic strongholds, and now I don't. And I can see why people in red states get so adamant about wanting to be on the offensive and wanting to do something about it, and not necessarily holding back and letting the worst come over. Especially because, holy cow, these people care about their kids. These people go to church. These people care about their local schools and community. This is important. And of course the cops aren't so bad, which of course it becomes important for us to actually engage, and create these things. I've been rambling a little bit here now, going a little back and forth on this stuff, but I think at the end of the day, it becomes important for us to acknowledge that we do have a structural problem. You need to get people comfortable with the idea that structure is rotted to its core, and we need to get people to acknowledge that maybe one day we can move on past it. I've always compared this sort of conflict culturally and politically to the Reconquista. It will take a very, very long time, but if it means that one day the society I live in is slightly better than it was for me, for my grandchildren, then so be it. And even then, that won't be enough, because the Reconquista took nearly 800 years. So no one I know is going to be alive to see it. But it starts now, and it needs to happen soon.
Yes. Planting trees in whose shade we will not sit in ourselves, but will hopefully be there for our children and posterity. Yes. I think one thing that I'd be interested in is just sort of seeing the different forms in which parallelism will sort of come across in the West. I think it's going to be different than what you see in South Africa. I don't think security concerns are as big of an issue as here, obviously. But I believe they will be in the future, at least in some areas. And I know in Detroit, for example, they've been experimenting with some private policing. I can't remember the exact name of it, but if for anybody interested, Tom Woods, the libertarian podcaster, he did a show where he interviewed a guy who does basically private policing services in Detroit, and they're able to get some tremendous results with it. And the way it started is Detroit, as everybody knows, kind of a shithole. And so what happened is small businesses and shops essentially pooled their resources together and paid for private policing as designed by this guy. And as a result, they've managed to make their place of business much more secure, much more safe. And not only that, but they sort of branch out and do policing as well. And one of the things they'll even do is do escorting, right? So if some woman is being escorting, legit escorting. So if some woman is being trailed by a stalker or whatever, and she's worried about, getting to work or getting home, like they'll provide an armed escort for this lady. And I think it's just going to be, we may see things like this sort of happen in places like LA, places like Oakland. But of course, if the local politicians allow them to operate, but it's going to take a lot of time. Other things that I've thought about is like kind of like a sakalicha for people like us, is kind of like a Western endowment for the humanities, essentially, where we're able to kind of like bankroll and like pool our resources and like push interesting things out there into the public. It's an interesting, worthwhile idea, I think. There's all kinds of things we can do but aren't doing yet, and I think the thing going forward is going to be how is building these structures and arming ourselves with the lawfare to sort of make them happen, and hopefully being able to engage in some degree of local politics to make at least temporarily safe bases of operation for them to operate in. So I think that's kind of what we got to look forward to going forward. Any last thoughts on that, Prudentialist?
I would say that right now there needs to be an acknowledgement that there's organization that needs to take place. I think that understanding that this isn't going to happen overnight is important. Knowing that this is going to take time, that there will be setbacks, but there is still ground, both legally and politically, that we need to be taking advantage of. Like I said earlier, the difference between the young person on the left and the young person on the right is the willingness to engage. You need to be on the ground. You need to, do what you know that you can do that doesn't risk yourself. If you're anonymous like ourselves, well, I don't know how much you have shown your face or not. I'm not too sure. But I mean, if you're anonymous, plan for the fact that one day you probably will be doxxed and plan accordingly. If you work in an area that you can't be vocal about things, understand that. Use your financial resources if possible. Be smart about it. But if you can take those risks, you have to be willing to do so. And the reason why, again, people say have kids, because it gives you a reason to have your skin in the game. There's a reason why our leaders are so corrupt and evil, is because most of them are childless and evil. And so with all that being said, it is a rear guard action. We will probably not live long enough to see the fruits of our labor, but there's a reason why we do this, for our posterity and because we want these things to succeed in the long run. So keep all that in mind and work locally, build what you can. And if you are in a position to build something, invest your money, take your capital and put it towards a project that's worthwhile. I highly encourage you to do so. It would behoove you to build something that lasts.
Absolutely. And yes, definitely have kids as well. And for those who haven't watched my video on why you should be a dad, you definitely should. And yes, I think that's one of the things that gets overlooked a little bit is, just outbreed the degenerates, man. That's kind of a glib thing to say, but it really is one of the most powerful things that I think you can do. So unless you're some sort of genius, high IQ, autistic eccentric who's not good with ladies and whose time may be better served, making amazing, being the next Isaac Newton, sure, maybe having a family isn't for you. If you're called to, become like a celibate monk or something, yeah, okay. Spiritual warfare, yeah, maybe having a family is not for you. But for literally everybody else, find a woman, start a family. Seriously. It's literally that simple. Now, I guess I'm going to end here with one last question, perhaps the most important question of all, which is, Prudentialist, how would you rate Texas barbecue relative to South African braai?
It would probably help if I've had braai to make an adequate comparison. But I live in Texas. I identify with the great state, as this saying goes, you can all go to hell, I will go to Texas. So I will defend the ever-loving hell out of Texas barbecue over braai, just out of pure nativist attitudes. But if you're ever in the States, there's a restaurant in Austin or outside of Austin called the Salt Lick that does just all kinds of, barbecue, brisket, steak, various cuts of pork. That is the one place that will, I think, change your mind on this position. I don't know if you're pro braai or Texas barbecue, but after there, you can't go back. So I'm just going to defend Texas barbecue out of just my natural predisposition to love Texas and all things about Texas, including Whataburger and all that jazz.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, for those who don't know, braai is essentially South African barbecue, but it is a little bit different from Texas barbecue and American barbecue more generally in just a couple of distinct ways. The first being that braai is typically done using wood and wood coals. Now, personally, I'm partial to this. And for most of my life, I did, are you a charcoal briquette man, Prudentialist?
I am, yes.
Okay, yeah. Now, charcoal briquettes, of course, are good, but the nice thing about braai in South Africa, using wood especially, is it almost gives like your meat like a smokehouse flavor a little bit. So typically, you'll have to sort of smoke your meat first and then you sort of barbecue it afterwards. With the braai, it doesn't quite get that, but it's close. So you cook your food with over these coals, but then you throw. But it also adds this nice, slightly smoky taste to it as you're cooking it. The other thing as well that makes it different is that the type of spice that is used is a little bit. It's a little bit more. How do I say? A little less white, oftentimes. Particularly the coloreds. The coloreds like to add like lots of different spicy flavors and whatnot to their braai, which I've become more and more partial to with age. Apparently, we have a dissenter in the chat. He's a Brazilian barbecue supremacist. That is disgusting. We should eject this interloper from our chat. Yeah, get out of here. Get the hell out of here. Okay. No, in all seriousness, though, Brazilian barbecue is also quite good. I find most grilled meat around the world to be quite good. Someone also jumping in here, glow in the dark. Yes, wood barbecue is great. Yes, that is the key. Best barbecue I've had was cooked on a campfire. I'll always appreciate propane just for the memes alone. So yeah, the old grill and dad meme. Yes.
All that and King of the Hill.
Oh yeah. Of course, that King of the Hill. No, it absolutely. The only problem with braai is that it takes a lot more time than typically barbecuing in the United States.
So, putting meat in the smoker just takes 6 to 8 hours.
Well, I mean, compared to like normal, sort of like normie barbecuing, like with the old propane grill sort of thing, like it does take a while, but I find it more and more these days. I'm sad to say that I find myself going native over here a little bit as regards grilled meat. Let me see here. From Jonathan Pohl, shashlik is where it is at. I have no idea what that is. Do you?
I don't, but I'm gonna go look it up now.
All right, yeah, I'm gonna Google it. Okay, so that we've sort of tackled the final area of contention, Texas barbecue versus braai. I believe we'll call it a night here. Again, if you are new here, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Helps out with the algorithm, the likes, and the comments. And the subscribes also, big help. I would like to become a tycoon of YouTube someday. So to help make that dream come true, I need you guys. Can't do without you guys. Prudentialist, you got anything you'd like to plug, sir?
Oh, sure. So my channel does a variety of political and historical commentary with a focus of international affairs and relations. I'm somewhere in between, I guess transitioning from that libertarian to reactionary pipeline. I'm somewhere down that line. I do book reviews based on my audience called Prudent Reads. We'll be doing one on May 1st with the ever so wonderful Aaron McIntyre. So on the 1st of May on Saturday. Every Sunday, we do a stream on international relations. And of course, I do weekly scripted content for everyone to enjoy based on what's going on in the modern world and political philosophy. I do this to give commentary and to give people a reason to be involved and to get engaged. Because if a guy with no working kidneys and does dialysis every day can create commentary and get people involved and politically active, then you can too, especially if you're healthy. So just like with Mr. Patriarch, if you can like, share, and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. We're all here to do good work. We're all here to do good things. Help us accomplish it.
Hell yeah. You hear that? Prudentialists is out there doing it. You should too. Don't be a bitch. Don't be a bitch. Find something to do. If you can't shoot, carry bullets or something, for God's sake. Or subscribe to us when we get monetized, or become patrons when we get monetized.
Yes, I do have a subscribe star. Do that.
Yes. All right, guys. Well, we're going to, comfy stream bros. Yeah, there we go. We're going to be wrapping it up here. Thank you very much for joining us. I've had a lot of fun, and I'll catch you guys next time. I'm going to be making a new, I think, part 4 for my Machiavelli series sometime this week. And have a good night, everyone.
Take care.
Patriarch out.